Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Spengler, Volume 2, second episode. We'll be talking about cities and peoples. Those, the three chapters, 4, 5, and 6. Volume 2 of Decline of the West is so much fun. It just keeps getting more fun as you go on.
This is peak Spengler.
We've got primitive men, we've got Fellaheen, we've got Spengler's particular form of race. He's very race obsessed, as a German writing or publishing in 1922 would be. It's just a special form of racism. This is not biological or Darwinian racism. This is something more special.
This is Faustian racism.
This is Faustian racism. It's in the same way that Evola, dismissed Darwinian racism and said, "No, I'm a spiritual racist." Spengler also he also puts his own spin on racism, but he's not a spiritual racist. He's a racist of the landscape, particularly, and makes all sorts of claims about the racial consequences of being born in a particular landscape. Probably going to talk about language too. Spengler has some really... He spends a lot of time in these chapters talking about the development of language. And like everything in The Decline of the West, and because I haven't read a great deal of Spengler beyond Decline of the West, but even from the few bits of his work beyond these two volumes that I've read, all of his concepts just interlink so much. So we're just going to be circling around these same few forms over and over again. It's very physiognomic. There's an underlying shape to the concepts he puts forward, and they actualize themselves in a bunch of different ways, like the castle and cathedral, totem and taboo, race and language, the city and the peasant landscape. It's so much fun.
Rhythm and reason.
Such a good time reading these chapters.
Yeah, he's great when he's talking about these tension points. He's axiom A and axiom B, and he really muscles out the tensions between these two axioms. That's when he's his best. And honestly, Decline of the West, it's basically a hyperlinked text, because if you look at multiple trends, like the C chapter 10 of a book 1. Like, I would love a digitalized Decline of the West, where it hyperlinks not only to itself but also to images. Like when he talks about the Samsara, like a mosque, you can actually see it in Samaria, Baghdad.
That is the ultimate Faustian project of The Decline of the West, to fully intellectualize it and place it into a writing beyond any sort of physicality. Because he has this section where he talks about how so much of speech is nonverbal, and even so much of written language, which he says is speech for the eye, is not just syntactical or grammatical, but it's also in how your hand shapes the letters. But then something like typing on a computer further intellectualizes it, because you strip away things like the handwriting and those sort of gestures. Gesture for him in language is very important. So not only are you doing that, not only are you further intellectualizing The Decline of the West by putting it on a computer screen, not even having it printed, but having it in a medium that can be transmitted forever, as a Faustian would love to do. But in hyperlinking it too, you're making explicit those intellectual connections between the various concepts and further systematizing it. Gabe, you've come up with the perfect Faustian project.
Yes, I do have the skull shape of the aristocrat of the intellect.
Yeah, he talks about skull shapes a few times in this, which the episode fell through, but I have recently read Vaught's Character Reader by L.A. Vaught, which was I think an early 20th century phrenology, like popular phrenology book by some American guy. So if anyone listening wants to do an episode with me on that, just reach out. But
yeah, there's a non-zero chance Capitalismo has that book.
Yeah, actually, he would be the most obvious choice for that. He's probably already read it. But I appreciated that Spengler would repeatedly, while dismissing Darwinian and biological racism as I wouldn't say necessarily just being for charlatans, but for people who are so deracinated, so removed from the blood that that's the only way they can see race, whereas Spengler understands a deeper form of race. Nonetheless, he still will bring up people's skull shapes. a few times he'll talk about like the long heads of a particular civilization.
Genes don't shape your skull. Your culture shapes your skull.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There are many different ways to skull shape, and Spengler's way, yeah, is being born cosmically within a landscape and having it shape you.
But still dynastically. Remember, Faustian is still dynastic and still obsessed with blood relations.
Yeah. But that's specifically Faustian. Presumably, I don't know. Okay, so would classical skull shapes be heritable in the same way? No, I guess let's get before we ponder very, very important questions like the phrenological development of classical man. We should give people a bit of context about what we're talking about in these chapters. So the cities and peoples chapters are basically what it says on the tin. He's really interested in the development of human settlements and the type of person that arises in tandem with these different types of settlement, because it's not cause and effect. I wouldn't say one is a consequence of the other. And Spengler, I think, definitely says it's not causal in that way. There's an underlying destiny subtending both the development of particular types of people, so primitive man into culture man into the fellaheen, and similarly just a purely nomadic landscape to the village or town into the city and the cosmopolis. And he's got these, and then he also tracks the evolution. I mean, when I say evolution, it's not in a Darwinian sense, in a Spenglerian sense, of language at the same time. Actually, one thing I do want to say, though, because when I was editing the last episode, I noticed this. I kept stumbling over my words whenever I talked about being, and I worked out why. Spengler, to make reading and talking about the decline of the West much easier for readers, I'm pretty sure, at least in the translation I have, that when he talks about being in Volume 2, at least some of what he's talking about refers to becoming, as referred to in Volume 1, because in Volume 1 he sets up this difference between being and becoming, and it's very central. And it's more in the background in Volume 2. And when he refers to being, I feel like sometimes he's referring to Volume 1 becoming. And I kept stumbling over that. So just for listeners, for clarity, when I talk about being here, I'm using it in the sense that he uses it in Volume 2 of The Decline of the West. And if I want to make the being becoming distinction, I will say that. And otherwise just assume I'm using being as opposed to waking being, which is the more important distinction in this volume. Did you find that, Gabe, or am I just... I felt like I was going crazy.
Because with the whole being and becoming thing, to be honest, I think Spengler, because there is notable changes and shifts in tone and writing style a little bit between Volume 1 and Volume 2, a lot. In terms of different focuses. Like I think he can get from a teaching standpoint. I think he can get away. If you're reading Volume 2, if you read all of Decline of the West Volume 1 diligently, I think he's like this. And when I say being, it's in relation to becoming. I like the becoming part. I like becoming a lot. Becoming is my thing. So when I say being, it's synonymous with becoming. It's like a kind of an interior language game. Or he himself slipped up and got confused sometimes while he's been writing his giant tome.
It could also just be translation, because in German, I don't speak German, but at least from what I've heard, there are so many different ways you can refer to what just becomes being in English. Or if they're, say, if someone is translating Heidegger, like they will actually just offer the German terms for these particular gradations of being, because it's easier than trying to render them in English. It might also be that, I don't know. Either way, I just wanted to point that out to probably just mostly clear up confusion on my part, apart from anything else.
Actually, to add to the confusion, would you say Weininger's sex and character, is that a product of being or is it a product of becoming?
That very much feels like he's so platonic in his approach to discussing men and women. I feel like that's very much of being. But Yeah, that feels like being to me.
We got a proper solid definition. Becoming a Spengler,
being is Otto Weininger. And from that, you know them by their fruits. You want to be a becoming man. I mean, Otto Weininger published when he was, I think, 23. Everyone accused him of plagiarism, and then he shot himself. Whereas Spengler, how old was Spengler when he died? He died in like the late 30s or something, didn't he? He lived longer than Otto Weininger, and he probably also had depending on, okay, so this is a value judgment. He probably wasn't a true cell, which depending on your position is a good or a bad thing. Spengler, he probably had more sex than Otto Weininger, judging by their texts from a pure textual analysis. Oswald Spengler feels like more of a sex haver than Otto Weininger. And that could also determine whether someone wants to completely dedicate their life to being or becoming.
But here's the thing. One died of a head full of hair. Well, fell to the Norwood Reaper.
Fell to the Norwood Reaper, yeah. One of them became aerodynamic, and the other one died a beautiful death.
Oh my god, he's German Mishima.
Mishima had a full head of hair. Yeah, he had lots of hair when he died as well. Apparently he was really disappointed that he was in his 40s when he killed himself.
He's no longer a sensitive young man.
Yeah, exactly. He's just a man.
Yeah. Sex and Character was his version of Death of the Decay of the Angel. Right?
For those who don't know what we're talking about, Otto Weininger wrote and published this book called Sex and Character, which is just this it's a platonic, I guess, examination of men and women, which is, at the same time, I feel like it's a work of a very, very intelligent man, and it also just feels completely insane in parts. It's just doing both those things at the same time, which makes it a very special text. Which I talked about with Nina Power on this very podcast, if you want to know more about it. Because it's a lot to read. It's a slog in parts.
So German autism comes in many flavors. In flavor.
Yeah, it's pure German autism.
And Spengler flavored.
Spengler has a lot of German autism, but he has also a lot of German schizophrenia because he's connecting so many things. This is a highly connective worldview.
Yeah,
whereas I feel like Sex and Character was more straight autism.
Yes, a straight. There's a lot of there's a lot of necessary need and speed and virility to Sex and Character. Well, there's more patience.
There's not much virility in Sex and Character. That is absolutely not something I would associate with Otto Weininger.
Well, no, this was his accursed share, right? He was storing the virility inside. If he had Volume 2, he would have killed himself. You need Volume 2. That's the only way Germans cannot kill themselves. They need to read 2 volumes of work, not 1.
Yeah. That's the trial they must pass. They publish their first book, and that's the danger period for Germans. If they can make it through to a second volume, they'll live a long and prosperous life. And if they don't, then they'll kill themselves in a way that makes them posthumously very, very, very popular. I say very popular. A few people took notice of Otto Weininger after he offed himself.
Yeah, Wittgenstein and the Lit Board.
And Strindberg.
Oh, I forgot Strindberg. And you know who was a big fan of Spengler, surprisingly enough? Fucking Jack Kerouac was a big fan of Decline of the West.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he actually used Fellaheen as a positive term. He got it from Decline of the West.
Yeah. I think a number of people did. I mean, we were saying before recording, I'm reading Oymersville again because I'm going to do an episode on it. And Junger was just so clearly loving Decline of the West Volume 2 in that. It's just straight. It's a dramatized version of Decline of the West Volume 2. If you like this book, you will love Oymersville. Anyway, Primitive Man. Let's talk about landscape and stuff like that.
Well, landscape is really interesting where he describes it, because he literally says that this ties into his little bit of his race thing. He says race, or even humanity, is just a thin strip of flesh over the skeletons of the earth. It's like really just a little film of flesh over the bones and the structure. Like with way Spengler portrays peoples, I think he even says this outright. Humans, people's identities. Men don't make cultures. Cultures make peoples. Capital P, peoples. The culture makes us, not the other way around. So he talks about the evolution from the village, not even from the village, from the pastoral, from the mere hunting and gathering stage. At that stage of humanity, we are actually adversarial to nature. He says we're adversarial to nature. And it becomes a strange development when we become pastoral, when we start farming and agriculture, where we have a more symbiotic relationship with nature.
And he sets up from our first episode, and from earlier in the book, he sets us up this distinction between the cosmic and the microcosmic. And the cosmic is you're plugged into the rhythm of the whole universe. And the microcosmic will take like a section of that and take that to be everything. And then within that small section, things can become increasingly intellectualized, increasingly abstract. And people can, those within the microcosm can fall under the misapprehension that they're in some way just completely separate from everything else or from their broader context. And this, when I say this, it sounds very abstract, but he just applies this particular physiognomy to, I guess to use a concept of his that is actually really, really useful more broadly. But, that physiognomy, that general shape of the cosmic and microcosmic declares itself in all sorts of places, like primitive man versus culture man, race and language, totem and taboo, castle and the cathedral. In the case of the landscape, like you said, the primitive man or nomads lead basically this animal existence, and they're microcosmic. They don't feel the beat of the universe or the rhythm of the universe, because Spengler loved music and just keeps using music metaphors in everything. And then so it really doesn't happen for everyone. The vast majority of primitive peoples just remain more or less animal and just roaming around. But for some, in a particular landscape, they start becoming cosmic. That is, they start feeling the rhythm of the land and of the place they're living in, the people they're with. And slowly from that begins to arise a world soul and a culture. And it starts to basically just align all of their behaviors and orient them towards something. So this is not to say that, Spengler never says that primitive man doesn't do things like have technology, or maybe they'll have burial rites, or they'll make art. They can do all of these things, but these things aren't unified in the same way that, say, the Baroque era was, where for Spengler, everything people were doing in that time and in that place was oriented towards something, and was obviously of the same lineage. I think it's in Volume 1, he makes the claim that if his physiognomic form of history were developed far enough, you could just take a single artifact from the springtime of a culture and from that extrapolate out the entire lifespan of that culture and civilization. That's the level of inward unity once a group of people becomes cosmic.
Yeah, he invented the idea of Wikipedia, hyperlinking.
Yeah. You just keep hitting the Wikipedia links.
Yeah.
But once people start becoming, or a primitive people start to feel the cosmic rhythm in that way and start cohering, so long as some disaster doesn't befall them and kill them off, they settle down in one place and they start to form a village. And it's in a village where people's sense of the cosmic, of belonging together and of being a people and eventually a nation, gets more and more and more intense. And he gets really into how people build houses, because he says that's the first or one of the very, very early expressions of this feeling of a burgeoning culture. And then he traces the development of, you get your village, and it gets more and more intensely cultural. And that leads to the springtime of a culture. You get this bloom of oriented output, of, say, artistic output, architectural output, linguistic output, all of these things that have suddenly been sort of harmonized by the cosmic beat. And eventually they'll form cities, and then, if anyone listening now probably is aware of the first volume of Decline of the West, of the lifespan of these things. You'll eventually get the cosmopolis and the civilization, and we'll start talking about that too.
Yeah, they basically fly off the earth. I think he says the megapolis, the cosmic. He says they're like a flame. They're like a floating flame above. He literally says above. They literally disconnect from the earth, like the intellectuality, and they literally snuff themselves out.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing. How for him, for a culture, as opposed to a civilization, a culture is very much based in the earth, and it's of the landscape that it arises from, and it can't be transplanted elsewhere. Like if you take all of the people who are living in a particular village or town, and Spengler says that culture is only ever really of the village or town. When he says, he'll sometimes say city in the English translation I have. I suspect that the word for city and the word for world city are different, because sometimes we'll talk about the city as a place of civilization. So for people who are real sticklers for precise language, when I say city here, I'm more meaning in the sense of a large town, like a large springtime or summertime town, rather than the world city or the cosmopolis, which is more autumn and winter and the decline of a civilization.
Yeah, each noun in Spengler's list has gradients. City, in the Western context, has very bad negative context, but in the classic polis, in the classical world, that's the center of the entire being, is city-states. So when you see Spengler talk about cities, you have to be very precise of, okay, in what civilization and in what era and age of that civilization in particular. Everything has gradients.
Yeah, and look, maybe the German language just handles this better than English, but it does make it sort of awkward to talk about if you're trying to be precise. Another really nice thing about these chapters, because volume 1 as well, actually, it's organized into like sections. So the cities and peoples chapter or section of this book is chapters 4, 5, and 6, and once you've read all of them, you are able to take in his concepts as a whole, as this organic whole, because he'll just keep reiterating the same shapes, more or less, in different guises. Hence why I imagine this conversation is going to be pretty meandering, because all of these ideas are so interconnected.
Because Spengler himself is meandering. It's like
yeah.
It's like those rhythm games, like an arcade game. Honestly, where you have to do the dancing patterns. There's literally a dance to Spengler. There's a rhythm to Spengler. And I would say intentionally so.
Yeah, I'm sure he would really like you saying that.
Yeah, there's something poetic about Spengler, in the way it's structured, because it rhymes, it repeats. And he purposely, intertwines and plays with different cultures. He would say, Charlemagne is like the Caliph of Frankenstein. Like he'll purposely,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and he is very much a primitive religiousness. It's of the very early burgeoning of the springtime religiousness. Charlemagne is a Christian. Charlemagne of the early Christianity, the way he practiced Christianity may have not been like the proper capital C Christianity of 100 years later or 100 years before. The primitive Christianity, early Holy Roman Empire, was completely a very unique and burgeoning and springtime thing. It wasn't codified. It wasn't petrified at that time. He discusses this a lot in the way he discusses everything around him, is that it literally is in degrees. I mean, yeah, he has these categories. There's 8 big civilizations, but he still says, I wouldn't be surprised to see Chinese influence in like Swedish furniture, or to find Roman influence in the Philippines. Like he says he wouldn't even be necessarily surprised about that, with how much the height of great cultures, the energy expenditure can just expand across globally.
Yeah, that's where his idea of pseudomorphosis really comes in, because he's got this. How about this? Like, so when you've got this will be meandering, but I will get to the point, because it's Spengler, and to explain anything, you have to explain, like, you have to draw in so many other concepts, which themselves probably require the original point you were trying to make to also be explained. It's sort of circular in that you need to pick up everything, and then everything slots together and you get it. But it was like I was saying before, you get these primitive people who, some of them will just cohere into this unified form language into a culture in a town, which has a soul, this totality of forms. And eventually it'll develop into a city, and sort of spring and summertime cities, they're very much of the landscape. They're all very distinct. I mean, you think back to Gothic Europe, how you had so many different cities that were themselves all important and all very, very distinct. And as a world soul ages, the connection to the land wanes, the connection to the blood wanes, and things become more intellectual and abstract. And you'll get a world city arising, or a handful of world cities, and these cosmopolises they make everything else provincial and start drawing in people from the provinces into them, and just obliterating their culture, formalizing their language, sucking the life out of everything around them, and mathematizing everything. And when I say mathematizing, I mean in the sense of, I think, the second volume, the second chapter of Volume 1 of The Decline of the West. The speed bump chapter, the one that if you're gonna stop reading Decline of the West, it's probably going to be in the maths chapter of the first.
the filter chapter.
Yeah, that's the filter.
The Pleb filter. The fella filter. The
fella filter. Yeah, and then eventually, you get this cosmopolis, which is just detached. It's no longer a culture. It's of a civilization. The soul that was animating the civilization, the culture is dead in the cosmopolis. And because it's no longer attached to the earth and the ground that gave rise to it, it's able to just spread. And it's when a world soul dies and you enter the civilization stage with a cosmopolis, it's when you get things like empire and this greatest spread of the particular forms of that civilization. And I think this is where I get to my point finally, responding to what you said. I think that's part of why he was saying it wouldn't surprise him to see some Chinese form language or pseudomorphosis in the classical world, or just way, way, way away geographically, because you have these cycles of a formerly cosmic or microcosmic, a cosmic culture, cosmic because it's attuned to the particular rhythms of the land it's in, reverting to being microcosmic in civilization. So you have these Reddit men who feel at home everywhere, are purely intellectual and able to spread out, and that's when you get these fragments of a formerly living form language thrown off, and then appearing in places that you would not expect them.
They start sprouting out like foreign mushrooms, basically.
Yeah.
And and he says this. He says with the Reddit men, with the men of the city, the intelligentsia, the men of the megapolis, like the city literally is their world, and so much so he says it's almost a grotesque parody of the classical civilization, where the polis, where the city, the literally structures of the buildings get taller and taller and taller because everyone wants to live in the center of the city, because the whole point of the polis is have that city feeling. The further away you are from the center of the polis, the further away you get from the classical feeling of civilization. Right, so people are cramped in here, and he says people would rather be cramped in these shitty, disgusting apartments and die on the pavement than have to go back home to their native village.
Yeah, exactly. And he says there's no longing like that of a man in civilization, advanced civilization, in the provinces, wanting to get into the cosmopolis, to feel as if he's somewhere that matters.
Yeah, he said it's the strongest form of nostalgia. He says this.
That's right.
He says it's the strongest form of nostalgia, even to cities he has never been. He'll always have he can send him to the mountains, to the oceans, no matter where he is. For any city, this is a type of space, not the particular landscape. The category of landscape, the city landscape, is where he belongs. And actually, I think a good concrete example of this would be, everyone's favorite Australian Spenglerian, which is Kenneth Clark. What's his name? Kenneth Clark? Or no, Kenneth Cook. Right? Kenneth Cook? Waking Fright.
Waking Fright, yeah. How much the John Grant in Wake in Fright loathes being in rural Australia and not in Sydney.
Yeah, and not only that, the scholarly introduction, because when you were discussing that book, remember, you're also discussing about the university. I forget where university republished it, but they did like a modern criteria introduction to the beast. And about how these people are intrinsically evil and bad, and they don't even try to understand the people of the Yaba, right? They intrinsically see, look how horrible these people are, rather than seeing this as a natural extension of their folk ways. And it's... And if you notice, in Wake and Fright, it's also a different example. Did I read the book? No, but I listened to the podcast. It's close enough. It's close enough.
That's what podcasting's for, though. You don't actually need to read anything anymore.
Yes, as a member of the intelligent osmosis, so we're both men of the intelligentsia, we have more nostalgic understanding of each other than actually experiencing the events beforehand. It's purely intellectualization. Right? So it's the only way I can understand things. So in the book, right, they demonize in many ways people about their drinking, their gambling, their playful punching of the kangaroos with spotlight, right? But it's also a relationship to the landscape. This is because all these three chapters, they cycle and intertwine with each other. It's tied to the language formation, because with the men of the pastoral, men of the primitive man, they have a deeply antagonistic relationship to nature, far more antagonistic than the men who are farmers or the villagers, who have much of a harmonious, symbiotic relationship. So with the men of the, let's say, the Anglo civilization, the men who are, Captain Cook and all of the colonists that go to Australia, the landscape of Australia changes them. They become a new race. The Aussie man becomes a new race. And it forms and shapes him, the desolate wastelands, the flatlands. He in many ways, the land compels him to just get blackout drunk on beers and beat the shit out of a kangaroo. It is really his interracial destiny to do so. I'm pseudo kidding, but not really in many senses. Spengler would say any group of people, if you put them in Australia, that act of punching the shit out of kangaroos would just spontaneously generate in a sense, or
They'll
some
start
relationship.
Shitposting.
Yeah, they'll start shitposting. If Lewis Woolston was not born, we would have to correct him, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is as good a time as any to start talking about his idea of race. So how would you say his idea of race differs from the other forms of race that were popular in 1920s Germany?
Well, he says, the proper form of German racialism is actually based on hair and eye color. He says that's the proper distinction of race. With the French, it's skin color and nose. With the English, which is Huxley, he says athletic abilities. And the way the Chinese distinguish this race is through smell. He just gives no citation on that.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Which, there's kind of a kernel of truth, because I actually do think, East Asians, or maybe just Japanese people in particular, actually have less, body odor. There's this weird gene they have where they use less deodorant.
I did hear about the smelly gene present in basically everyone except East Asians, which is why East Asians think white people smell rank.
See? So that's one of the Spengler was true on that part of the racial distinction.
Spengler can't stop being right. He just keeps getting things right. He predicted all of the pro-natalist conferences.
That's
in civilizations.
True.
Yeah. He's got that whole section how on Civilization Man just stops reproducing because he no longer feels the call of the blood, and it no longer terrifies him that he might end his line. He just doesn't care anymore because he's not connected to the ground. And
it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit in his Reddit chart. He can't put it. Like, he says they can't rationalize it. It's like, oh, well, why do I have to continue my bloodline? Like, he basically says that.
Yeah, truly, if people want to get the best description of the late Civilization Man in Spengler that I can give is it's just Homo Redditus. It's just Reddit man.
It really is.
It is eerily reminiscent of Reddit man.
Yes, he says, they go into their book clubs and their little cells, and they write their books, and they think they can impose upon destiny. They think they can rationalize their way out of destiny. He's basically talking about subreddits for all intents and purposes. And he gets very angry on that.
Oh, yeah. He gets angry on a lot of things. But let's get back to talking about race.
Yeah, everyone's favorite subject.
Everyone's favorite subject.
A book clip from hell. Other than the Trans Manifesto. Actually, he would also, I think he would say the Trans Manifesto is a good example, actually, of the city
of civilization.
Man.
Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Because it's not only disconnected from the blood, it's disconnected from even who you are as a gender and as a sex. It's complete disconnect. It's like a great example. It's actually literally a physical example, a physiognomic example, if you will. That book, that text, is a great example of that.
Not merely of Civilization Man, but of Faustian Civilization Man, of trying to escape the body and to fully dematerialize the body into something that can be infinite and infinitely reshaped.
Yeah, it's boundless.
Would it arise in classical cosmopolises? You'd say, would Alexandria, at the height of its power, have had the Transmaxing Manifesto? I'm not sure. I feel like that requires a Faustian civilization. I might be the most retarded thing I've ever said.
I have to agree. Oh, right, because with the Faustian man, it's because he talks about this. The classical thing, if they were to see the idea of wanting to change your sex, it would be a relationship to the gods. It would be something. It would be a desire that you pray to Athena, like how Pygmalion wished for Aphrodite to give him his statue, GF, right? His version of Grok chant, right? With Faustian man, he views his way of morphing the environment around him, right? I would say with the trans thing, it'll be much more. It's more libertine. It's more shit happens. They wouldn't create an identity around it. It'll be just the gods willed it, or this is what this is cursed. I got this kink. This is what God's wanted of me, right? But with the eye of Faustian man, it has to be a systemic relationship of I will this to be. Not only I will this to be, I will it to be in a systemic expansion across the universe itself, across existence itself.
Yeah, to turn it into a system that is abstracted and therefore possibly infinite.
Yeah,
you're making a lot of sense here, Gabe.
Yeah, if you told Aristotle, listen, there's this weird town in the south of Africa. They got chicks with dicks. He's like, okay, in this particular part of Africa, they got chicks with dicks. That's their way of being, and he would just leave it at that.
Herodotus would write about it extensively. It's like, you would not believe what I just heard.
And men of libertine taste would go visit there from time to time, right? It would be
the Athenians would love it.
Oh, absolutely, the lady boys. Plato speaks of this, but in all sincerity,
Plato would have lost his mind if he knew that Thailand existed. Oh my god.
That's Thailand is where the Republic is. Few know this. It's where he talks about this in Atlantis. Yeah. Atlantis was
the reason why Plato wrote anything is he did not know about Thai massage parlors.
Yes, see, that's why selective breeding of bird philosophy was written. It was to make that connection. But in all sincerity, what Spengler, what he's talking about, about how men, he's also talking with women, about how he talks about George Bernard Shaw, about how to be emancipated, in order for women to be emancipated, they be emancipated not only from family, but from childhood and from womanhood. Only from being emancipated from womanhood itself can it be truly emancipated. That's a direct quote from George Bernard Shaw. So not only just from the usual feminist thing, from the obligations to family, all these things. No, from womanhood itself. So that's actually another sincere tie into the whole trans manifesto thing. You take that to the logical conclusion, is literally getting rid of all biological components itself. in terms of getting totally disconnected from the ground. Like, again, the megapolis is literally, he says the megapolis is round, it is structured. It is a giant sphere, but inside it, it's checkerboard structures. Because he talks about with design, with planned cities, that's where the doom begins.
Right. Yeah.
He says any state with a checkerboard city rather than a natural sprawling city, there's always an intense danger of egotism with there. Because to plan a city is in sense egotistic. Like he references Peter the Great, for example, or he also references a sultan in Iraq whose name escapes me at the current time. These were planned; these were egos. Like he also says with Germany and Berlin, with Bismarck and Napoleon, these are their greatest gifts in many ways. They're expending their energy to create these cities, but they're always separate from the environment around them. The Paris and Napoleon was always in contrast with the France of Brittany, for example. Or even the lower south of France, for example. It was with the birth of Napoleon, a Napoleonic state, where again to bring up languages. He talks about the English in Shanghai, right? The English stops being an authentic language when she could purely speak English in Shanghai. A native speaker and a Chinese speaker, and an English speaker can tell no difference from that and going home and they speak the exact same kind of English. The native speaker himself, because it gets untied from the gestural, from the expression, because he even talks about this with how you talk to a baby, right? A baby can make you laugh by saying hello. The word hello is not funny, but because it is your baby and the way they said it, the way they took their head, the way they sounded out the word hello, in that moment in time, that word hello is completely spontaneously a new word from the usual mere utilitarian sign of the word hello. Right, it's about the gestures, how you express yourself. He even uses that with the dog and the man. Right, these words in their context. He says, the words were generated in conversation. He's talking about separating speech from speaking. Right, the whole scholastic tradition of pedagogy, of teaching. Schools and commerce can only exist if you can take the intrinsic way communication way speaking is even conducted, and completely commercialize it or intellectualize it into a pure static craft, right? The craft of mere communication rather than actually expressing a particular form of that time, what you're communicating about. I can really see why Spengler resonates with you so intensely, because you can go off on your free associative discursions and remain entirely within the framework of Spengler. Without going off and making just impenetrable references to flower metaphors. You have a Spenglerian mind. Yeah, there are so many things there that I could talk about. The rhythms of him. His blood flows through me in many ways. I'm a Goth's man. Blood,
it's very continental and German in the sense that once you say, if you just read a single chapter, you're getting such an incomplete view of things, and it seems both circular and incomplete at the same time. But then when you read enough of it, you comprehend it as a whole, as an organic whole, which makes talking about it to people who just don't have any familiarity with Spengler sort of difficult. But I also just assume if someone's listening to a series on the second part of the Decline of the West, we can mirror Spengler's own the physiognomy of his works more accurately, because people are probably already bought in. People already kind of know what we're talking about, I'm sure, if they're listening to this.
Yeah, you're not dealing with any other physiognomy in your bedroom if you're listening to Volume 2, Episode 2 of the Spengler podcast.
Yeah, you're sleeping alone with a copy of Man and Technics and a portrait of Spengler's bald head. So no one is sharing your bed.
He's just staring at you, never goon. Gooning is for the cosmic megapolis. A megapolis man goon. You never goon.
Yeah, but you bringing up city blocks is good, because that's such a good way of illustrating how he'll set towns and cosmopolises or world cities against each other, or cultures and civilizations, because a culture is of the landscape, it's of the blood, and it's of cosmic rhythms, and as such, the layout of a town or a city is organic and it's of the landscape, so it'll follow a river. You won't have just a grid of city blocks. each individual dwelling and then the relationships between dwellings, because they're all the inevitable destiny of an underlying world soul, are going to be consonant. They're going to be harmonized with the landscape and with each other. They're going to obviously be the expressions of a single form language. But once you hit civilization and you're in autumn or winter and the world soul has died and there's no longer any inner coherence to things arising from a group of people. And I say a group of people, not a people or a nation anymore, because they're not that anymore. There's no inner unity. That's when you can get things like planned cities or city blocks. Just a grid that pays absolutely no attention to the land it's covering over, because the people doing so are no longer connected to that land and they no longer feel the land's rhythm and beat. They're purely tension. And yeah, him talking about planned cities and city blocks and chessboard cities, as he calls them, is such a good illustration of how he views cultures and civilizations.
Yeah, and I said this to you because in that very same section,
yeah,
he says a Greek historian tells us of an ancient Egyptian king who was dethroned, and he ended up dying in some city slum in Rome in some apartment. And it reminded me specifically. I read this when I was reading an Ottoman history book. Literally the last Ottoman prince after he was dethroned, he ended up buying an apartment and dying in 1933 in an apartment in New York City.
That's so grim.
You never bet against Spengler, bitch. Cyclical history, trust the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and another Ottoman prince killed himself in a hotel lounge. Actually, it's just for some reason Turks in New York City just go to. Well, that's the megapolis at that in the early 1900s that was easily the megapolis of the world.
Yeah, New York City is still, I think, one of the world's foremost cosmopolises. Yeah, one day it might shift to being Shanghai or something. Shanghai sort of already is a cosmopolis, but it could eclipse New York.
Or once we experience our second religiousness and Caesarism, when Trump makes the freedom cities, he promises.
The neo-pagan Trump Caesarate.
Yeah. Yeah, once we experience a second religiousness, that's what MAGA is. It's a second religiousness of our late civilization, right? And doing so much like Peter the Great, forcing his Western weeabooism. He forces his really gaudy, oddly Persian, like Trump just loves gold and shit. Have you ever seen his old apartments? It goes like Arab or Persian immigrant coded. Like he's like Alexander the Great, because Spengler also talks about this. About Alexander loves the god.
Yeah, when will he take a Persian bride? I mean, I guess he has an Eastern European wife, and his interior decoration taste is extremely Slav. Just gold on everything, fake marble, diamant on everything.
Oh, it's Neo-Byzantium, right? Because he talks about Constantinople. Spengler mentions this.
A recrudescence of the Eastern Empire. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, hold on. I have the quote right here. Okay, here. It's a little bit of a long quote, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, go for it.
The Germanic Western pre-culture, meanwhile, is moving on, but slowly underground. For the sudden illumination, which we mostly ineptly call the Carolingian Renaissance, is a ray from Baghdad. It must not be overlooked that the period of Charles the Great is an episode of the surface, ending as accidentals do end without issue. After 1900, after a new deep depression, there begins something really new, something having the telling force of a destiny and deep the promise's duration. But in 1800, it was the sun of the Arabian civilization, passing on from the world cities of the east to the countryside of the west. Even so, the sunshine of Hellenism and the spread to the distant Indus. So he's talking about here, I think this is in reference to Constantinople. He also mentions Constantinople a little bit later on, but basically you see this city, these Hellenic states where the Greek states is quote Greek, because he also has a big bugaboo about how we call peoples their names and so forth in labels.
Yeah, he spends a lot of time on that.
Right, he's talked about how the Byzantines they slowly morphed from the structure of a classical civilization. See, here's the thing. So the cult is complicated because he does talk about cultural mutations. We use the word mutations. Obviously, he would not like that word, but for the reader to understand. So the quote-unquote Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, its form or its political structure was that of a late classical civilization. emperor and so forth. But and to rejuvenate from the rays of the Eastern Magian, it becomes a Magian civilization and morphs to a Magian civilization. And you can see it in terms of its forms and in terms of its structures. The Orthodox cathedrals and the Orthodox churches, right? Where the churches itself is an ornament. You cannot separate. It's not a building ornaments. No. The building itself is an ornament. Right, you literally cannot have an Orthodox church without the mosaics. It's an intrinsic part of an Orthodox church. If it's not, doesn't have mosaics, it's not an Orthodox church, right? So the mere form of the self, it slowly morphs from a late classical civilization structure to a Magian culture, and the Constantinople is like this weird go-between between this allure and this new rejuvenation. Because in an earlier chapter, in chapter 1, the chapter I quoted during the Oblivion remake video, he talks about in the late civilization, right? There's a second religiousness, but they also yearn for like this new kind of Oriental. They like Orientalism. They like going to the mysterious East, and right, these weird 101 different sun cults that are popping up at the time. Like Aurelian's Solar Invictus, the man who briefly reformed Rome, or Diocletian. He even mentions that Diocletian tried to become a pope or a caliph. Right? He tried the pagans during their last grasp, trying to form to shit on modern day pagans. When the last day of the pagans, they tried to formalize paganism. Diocletian tried to become almost like a pope of paganism as a last stand against the Christian menace. And the thing is, that's so intrinsically alien to the pagan form. The spontaneity of this is the door of Janus. When it's wartime, we open a door. When it's peacetime, we close the door. Why do we do it? We just do, right? To try to formalize it in a Catholic structure, it's absurd on its face. And Diocletian failed in being the Pope of paganism, despite trying to do so. And they fall into the allure of the Eastern Magian. The suckle, he uses a liquid metaphor, they get drunk on this Eastern Magian mysticism. That's where where Constantinople, this beautiful people of a practical, because even in our previous chapters, he talks about the Romans, the praetors were deeply practical. The gods are okay, as long as Rome survives, the gods are okay, to the point the classic cliche of the Orthodoxy and the Byzantine is that they're too busy counting how many angels you can fit on a pin than actual battle plans. That's how obsessed the scholastic they were of the convert zeal of early youthful Orthodoxy at the time, or Byzantine Christianity at the time. We wouldn't necessarily call it Orthodoxy at that time. And he talks about this, how these cultures shape and evolve and new peoples are born. What they call themselves and what language they use is not representative of the people themselves. Peoples are an inward destiny. He says this is an inward feeling. It all caps feeling. You can only feel a people. Because he has a big bugaboo about romantic nationalists, about like linguistic nationalism. He thinks linguistic nationalism is absurd. Because he says this, the Prussians, the Holy Teutonic Knights in 700 defeated the pagan Prussians. And then suddenly in 1870, the Prussians, people calling themselves Prussians, defeated France or at the gates of Paris. Like, it's absurd to be a historical scholar that way, just based on name lineage, rather than actual. You got to be careful with your labels, is what he even says. What we're labeling is people put the cart before the horse way too many times, and when they actually structure names and language. He even separates. He says race and language are not intertwined, like most historians at the time. He says you need to treat these as two separate things. Right? A plant has race, but it does not have language. That's a parameter. Yeah. That's a parameter of all things of Spengler. Is it like a plant? Yes, then it's racial.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, the race and language thing is, we may as well bring it up now, because his idea of race is it's very cosmic. It's, plant-like. It's linked to the ground and to the blood. You grow from the ground, and it can't be moved. And it's based on the landscape very much. He talks about how Americans, beyond the first generation, weren't European settlers, that they were Americans because they grew from the land and were different and were influenced by it, by tapping into its own particular cosmic rhythms. And he sets this up against language, which he says is, to greater or lesser extents, because language can also be divided into different types of language, but language, it's more microcosmic because it assumes that you are microcosmic, and your interlocutor is also not inwardly linked to you in this way, and so you need some sort of way to communicate. And as people fall out of culture and into civilization, then languages become more grammatical and more explicit and more structured, because you need more and more structure in order to communicate between each other in a civilization, because you don't have that underlying world soul allowing some cosmic communication anymore. His idea of race is, I think, yeah, you need to get his idea of language to really get what he's talking about when he talks about races.
Yeah, because he says, like, being a fuddy-duddy about grammatical rules and the whole reverence of the mother tongue, he says that's the fragility of late civilization speaking. Because if you look at the peak of the Normans, I mean, there was Normans in England, there was Normans in Sicily, there was Normans in North Africa, and they didn't feel any shame or any, they weren't culturally portraying themselves. They were confident enough in their own cultural identity. They could speak Sicilian. They could speak whatever English version of English was at the time. Language is fluid. Language can be fluid, and language has its own history. He says the study of language is important, but you can't just go willy-nilly and try to fuse it with the peoples. These are intertwined things, but they're not exactly the same thing. It has its own genealogical structure and its own history, right? Rather than trying to meld these as one single study, right? Because he also has a big bugaboo about the Indo-Aryan invasions and migrations. Like he says migrations are important, but you shouldn't fetishize migrations upon itself. Like migrations have an entire, again, it also about how the peoples don't do culture. Culture happens upon them. And it's only during conflicts. Again, this concept of I, we, and thou, right? He even brings in the Mormons. The Mormons became a people in 1839 when they were expelled from Missouri, when they were defined as the other from someone else. Mormons became a unified us when someone else defined them as a them. You know what I mean? Or when the Crusaders became a unified Christendom, came unified when the Crusaders took the oath to fight the infidels in Jerusalem, right? In terms, it's so weird because he doesn't advocate necessarily for civic nationalism, because he makes fun of French-style civic nationalism when they went on the French Revolution.
And he regards it as just decayed Reddit man, or decayed civilization man. The idea that you can come up with these abstract ideals and say that people belong to them because because of reason or something universal like that.
It's a revolt against history and a revolt against destiny. It tries to create its own artificial sphere away from it, right? It's an artificial imposition from the intellect, right? They try to, it's in their point of view, in Spengler's world, the demiurge is good. Because they're with the French Revolution, they're trying to create this weird, like the real world of destiny, culture. These are all prisons, and they're trying to escape it. And by achieving this knowledge, achieving this intellectualism, this reverence of intellectualism, they're trying to escape basically being itself. They're trying to escape existence itself, right? By imposing this world, as he says, a world of peace, equality, literally rebelling against time, because he doesn't bring it up. I think it's a good thing to bring up amongst ourselves. What the French did, they literally made a cult of reason and make up their own calendar. They literally went away from the Gregorian calendar, literally revolting against time itself and making their own calendars, right? That's how much they're trying to impose their egotism, much like how this is this planned city principle, not only applied to land, upon time and destiny itself. Once you start city planning, you start being planning and existence planning, imposing your egotism and your identity, your I, your intellectualism upon existence itself. And he says this is absurd. This is absurd. So he's very anti-linguistic nationalisms, even though he says, because it's different from creedal nationalism, because he's fine with creedal nationalisms, because he has a whole sector on Persians, Persians and the Jews, and about how what is a German, what is an Osgoth, 10 generations ago there was Osgoths, there were Swabians, and now 10 generations later we're all hardcore die in the wool Germans. You know what I mean? Well, 10 years ago everyone's about to die in the wool Osgothian or Lotharingian or something like that. It's like people form in chains. A person who's racially a Jew, who's willing to, he says, sacrifice a goat to Apollo, he has become a Greek. at that sense, or become at least he's become a non-Jew or a non-believer. Same thing with a Christian at that point; they will both become a pagan version of a Gentile. In an odd sense, this is also later day paganism, right? Where they're forcing their beliefs. This is also just showing a decay of the paganism, where you had to force. Hey, you need, in order to be part of the pagan polis, you have to sacrifice to Apollo now, because Christianity is such an alien, where Christianity says no to everything, while paganism roughly says yes to everything. To a certain degree, because Magian is internal. Magian, if a Persian or Zoroastrian, for example, was to deny the existence of Zoroaster, right, or a Jew would deny the existence of Zoroaster, despite both of them being ethnically Persian, they become two separate peoples. Like I think he says two brothers. Even someone says two brothers from the same mother would become two distinct capital P peoples. That's how much he is of a cultural determinist.
Yeah. And this is where, too, you can see the differences between how he defines a race and a people or a nation. Because race is very much... It really is your sensitivity to the destiny of landscape. So, yeah, actually, maybe so we can set up the difference between the race of Persians. So we can talk about the Magian time. So he says, the race of Persians, you had all of these different Darwinian races of just people whose biological origin was around the place, who moved to the area that we would call Persia, and being influenced by that landscape and being cosmically sensitive to the landscape's destiny, became of the Persian race. And race for Spengler in these chapters is particularly important because a culture arises with the sensitivity to race, to the sensitivity to the destiny of the land, and then civilization arises when that sensitivity to destiny and race starts to disintegrate, and instead of a unified single body, you just get like a population in a place, and they're not sensitive to the landscape anymore. And that is set against his idea of a people, which to me feels like a true sense of a people or a nation is contingent upon some sensitivity to race. So in the Magian sense, he says Magians become a people when they are a part of the same, he calls it a juridical body. Then they're part of the same faith, and there are certain things that you just have to believe to be a member of this faith, and when you believe those things, you become of that nation. And he'll talk about how in Palestine you would have you just have different languages for different forms of Aramaic for Christians and Jews who are just living in the same place, but they were considered different people and different nations in the Magian sense. However, to even be able to conceive of those things as being different nations on the basis of belonging to a different juridical body, that required a sensitivity to the destiny of the world soul underlying them, which required a sufficiently strong sense of race. I think that's how he picks apart race and nation, which are two really important ideas in these three chapters. And they sort of track together, but then they separate at key moments.
Well, for example, in relation to physical space, because the Magians they have no landscape, or at least he says something like, they have no earthly, their landscape is heavenly, or not this earth, or something along those lines. He says they have a landscape technically, but it's ethereal, right? Yeah, and
isn't it the gold coated cave? Like it's all internal.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Enclosed.
Yeah, it's a closed, it's a deeply, oddly private landscape that shapes them, that they all belong to. That's their quote unquote nation, a nation across all physical landscapes. Well, the classical man is a city-state person, a polis, particularly literally a center point. Well, the Faustian man and the Gothic man there's a sense of a dynastic tree. He even says a tree of many roots, like Yggdrasil. Yeah. Like I think the translator mentions the Nordic myth of Yggdrasil, the world's tree, right? From Lithuania to Bavaria, to the fact that you cannot see the borders and not even comprehend the borders. You don't even know the borders exist, but it's still the fatherland, right? This sense of you don't know where the roots end, but you know that there is touching at all points. Like, that's the weird thing, because he says the idea of dynasty in the European context comes from the Faustian Gothic man, right? The idea of dynasty and blood, but again, not blood in the Reddit mere zoological way, in a very that the current Kaiser or the current Pope, he says it doesn't matter if they're a retard or not. The mere presence of the Pope himself not only represents all the popes before him and the Kaisers before him and the kings before him, but all the kings and popes after him. These are simultaneous, the infinite. They're touching both the present and the past are touching tips at the present at all times. There's no past, present, and future. These are all simultaneously existing in one interlocking thread. That's the Faustian thing. There is no sectorial gradients of this is the past, this is the present, this is the future. No. These are all simultaneous. These are all on a flat line experience at the same time in the present, in the Faustian culture.
Yeah. We're all continuous with the past, and that's giving weight to us reaching into the future or into infinity.
And this is why the damn Renaissance ruined everything.
He repeatedly brings up how much he dislikes the Renaissance throughout both of these books.
Because he says the Renaissance was this petty party politics, this petty city politics, mere presentism. They were literally denying fate and destiny and history. They were literally ahistoric. The Renaissance was ahistoric and denying the existence of history itself. This man is the biggest hater of Renaissance you've ever seen.
Oh yeah, he does not like it at all. Yeah, because he says it's fundamentally unlike the classical world soul, which is of a self-contained body. So a polis where you can see every part of it, a classical temple where there's no meaningful distinction between inside and outside because everything is the one body. For them, something like the Renaissance would simply not make sense. It's a fundamentally Faustian event, but one that doesn't understand itself to be Faustian at all.
It's merely LARP. It's LARPing. It's a Faustian that's very deeply embarrassed to be a Faustian.
Yeah, I guess there are still Renaissance fairs, so it's LARPing as a LARP.
A much more honest Renaissance fair. At least know it. At least they feel some shame in their LARPiness.
Yeah. What do you reckon? Oh, we can talk about the fellows. Because the fellaheen are... so you've got your nomads, your primitive men, and they're all microcosmic, and then you get your village men who develop or tap into that sense of race, of destiny, according to the landscape, and start to develop a culture and become cosmic and enter into history, actually, because that's something really interesting. Is he says history is basically just the history of towns and cities. It's the primitive man is ahistorical because he's just the same all the time. He just doesn't change. Great empires can rise and fall, but the primitive man he's just always there. It's just this constant source of almost like a constant source of the possibility for cosmic sensitivity to be achieved and for a culture and a destiny and a history to arise that's not always taken. It's just this constant resource and potential. And then history begins in the towns when cosmic contact is made. But then as a culture dies and you go into civilization and you lose that inward coherence of a culture, you'll have people in the cities, and the city is just sucking up all of the people from the landscape around it. He talks about cities sucking the blood out of the countryside, and you have the people in the cities who are high civilization men, just ultra intellectual, ultra linguistic, no sense of race or blood or destiny. They're purely causal. And then you've got the people left in the countryside around the city, those who haven't gone into the city, and he calls these people the fellaheen, who are they're historyless, they're not really of the civilization in a meaningful sense because they're not entering the city. They might interact with it somewhat or be aware of it, but they don't truly understand it. And then once the city disintegrates, or the cosmopolis disintegrates, and it always will, because people within it just lose any sort of desire to reproduce, and it just collapses, what you're left with are Fellahin. And they, once again, they're microcosmic. They're no longer connected to the land. They have no history. They're just this an animal existence in which there can be events. There can be the turnover of leaders. There can be revolts. There can be wars. But none of these have any historical significance. There's no inner unity to any of their actions. It's just animal. It's just the rule of force. Until once again, somewhere on Earth, you get a cosmic upswell again, and a new culture is formed. And that's where Oymersville by Ernst Junger is great, because it really is a dramatization of living in a Fellahin city.
It was almost an apocalyptic. The Fellahin is almost an apocalyptic being in many ways. Like, because the Fellahin, because he does note the Fellahin is still connected to race and still connected to blood. They still are connected to that, unlike the city man. Because he even says housing. Yeah. He's like the Fellahin in the Latin Fellahin who still lives in the Latin huts in the outskirts of Rome. The Latin hut still preserves the Roman race. He says a race, you could destroy the decorations, the customs, the culture. But I think he literally says if you destroy the house of the race, like racial housing, you destroy the race itself. Like, so as long as you have the primitive racial abode, so he says housing needs to be studied. The way you have your cups, not the decoration of the cups. No, the way the handles are shaped. An example, if your race is like 6 feet tall, if the shelves are 6 feet tall, the mere utilitarian, the very fact that all the shelves are based on your height, and he says unconscious, it's not measuring. You just naturally put shelves at high sight or wherever along these lines. These are not. He even says the way you sit, the way you gesture, is all be unconsciously the way you place things within your house, within your home. He says it's like the honeycomb to a bee. It's the most internal state of not existence, but the eternal state of life. He uses a metaphor I cannot remember, but it's something along those lines. It's the most intrinsic part of oneself that one feels at home. You can never properly intellectualize the concept of home. It's only purely experienced. And once you eradicate the sense of home, that's how you truly genocide a race, basically, is to eradicate the idea of homes. And he says, to Fellahin, he says, in many ways, he says the intellectuals, the cosmopolitans, the sons of the megalopolis, they are also Fellahins. I think he says they're worse Fellahins, at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah, because they degrade into Fellahin eventually, because there's that time when I guess it's a gradient, how they're losing their connection to destiny and they're becoming more microcosmic, they're becoming more intellectual, and there's eventually going to be a point when they're so brittle, their culture is dead, they have no destiny at all, they're purely causal, that their society just breaks apart. And they just revert to being Fellahin or primitive man. And
the thing is, they're accelerationists because they're actually proactively trying to instigate destiny. While Fellahins are oddly free, I wouldn't say objectively free in a sense. History does not concern them. They're outside of destiny's purview. So there's a sense of freedom.
They're completely... Yeah, they're just standing outside it. And they can be influenced by it. So plenty of them will move to a city, and that's at a time when a world city arises, one that's uprooted from the soil, and because it's uprooted from the soil, people who are not of that landscape can understand it and integrate into it, and that's when it starts sucking up people from the surrounding areas, and they don't really become those people who move from the provinces into the world city. Don't suddenly start, they don't really become part of its history or its destiny. because it's at the stage when it's so deracinated that anyone can become part of it. They remain Fellaheen when they move into the city. They're just now in a different place because place has stopped meaning anything in the same way that it would mean something to someone of a springtime civilization, like to a Gothic man, for whom the specific location of a city in which that person grew up would be deeply important, and they couldn't understand another city in quite the same way.
Yeah, for our Fellaheen coming in, despite they have the potentiality of blood and potentiality of rhythm, but they go into Rome and, the Janus doors? Oh, those are just doors. It doesn't matter when they're open or closed. You know what I mean? Where that was the red siren. That was like, oh shit, we're in war. You know what I mean? That was the signal of doom. Well, for a Fellaheen, they're just doors. The Fellaheen thinks that they're just doors. The Cosmopolitan thinks they're just doors. But the potentiality of generating something else is within the Fellaheen. The natural Fellaheen.
Yeah. And I say this as a rootless cosmopolitan myself, but there are eerie parallels between what he's describing and sort of a certain group of people now, the citizens of nowhere, or the global citizens, who really feel at home anywhere where their particular class is. So you can go anywhere where there are people who are tertiary educated at Western universities and feel at home because those places are homogenizing across the world. There's this enormous, geographically discontinuous nation of certain neighborhoods around the Western world. And, look, maybe it's rising in China as well. I just don't know nearly enough about that place to really say. But Spengler predicted it in 1922.
Yeah, he predicted, growth of cities. He says, I expect in year 2000 that average cities will have millions and millions and millions of people. He even makes a demographic prediction at multiple times.
Yeah.
Like 2000 AD, I think that's the exact date he gave, actually.
Yeah, I remember him saying in 2000.
Yeah, and with Spengler, and he when he says he's rootless cosmopolitans, the fact that, yet again, like the Aussie libtards will feel much more, would rather literally die broken alone in New York, Shanghai, or anywhere than be a millionaire getting drunk with the boys at at the Yaba. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in Broken Hill.
Yeah, they're completely alien. It's like a ration. He says there's a deep, intense antagonism. It's the antagonistic element is there. It was very strongly there, because it's weird because you feel empathy for the intelligentsia man, because they're kind of a very highly. It's like pandas, right? The panda does not necessarily want to die. They don't necessarily want to go extinct.
They don't want to live either.
Yeah, they don't want to live either, right? But that's the thing. It's okay. It's like, because you are a panda, you are a Fellaheen, you are intelligentsia. You can only be evolutionary adapted in such a particular way. When all those needs are met, you don't know what else to do. You know what I mean? So it's almost intrinsic in their nature to kind of just simply any morphosis. Well, the Fellaheen, he says, people can be awakened, people can be formed. He says nations and ideas and peoples are originated in minorities. And it basically, kind of a spiritual version of elite theory. He says, in the early days of France, when a king held his court, he would say, France is inside this room. You know what I mean? The idea of France, the nation's inside this court. And these kind of things. It's the same thing why, he even mentions of the dynastic thing. It's like there's pieces of Germany, like Lotharing, I can't remember, but it's from this guy named Lothar, something along those lines. But even though he didn't have any kids, there's no Lotharanian Germans, but the fact that it's still named after him, despite him having no genetic children, right? And naming yourself after heroes, after strong elite cultures, right? Everything is top down. And the thing is, when elite men rise up, when these heroes rise up, basically, they can awaken. He literally says awaken almost in a literal sense, a sense of being an us. This inward destiny awakens amongst the Fellaheen. Fellaheens can be at least awakened. You can awaken a Fellaheen. There's whole Caesarism and populism. Basically, he's describing a spiritual populism in a sense. The nation of France, the Napoleon Bonaparte France awakened. In Prussianism, the Hour of Destiny, a later book, 1933, Spengler says with Napoleon III, now Napoleon III was notoriously reviewed as a clown, kind of. Some benefits, definitely not his uncle, right? But he says with Napoleon III, Spengler says the old Frenchman was awakened, the arrogant, the cocky, the warlike, and you get both negatives and positives. He doesn't. Spengler is in many ways non-judgmental in ways you'd expect him to be, and in ways that you wouldn't expect him to be. He says the old Frenchman briefly returned with Napoleon III, the braggadocious adventuring type, the warlike Frenchman, and as Napoleon Bonaparte III, Louis, I think his name was Louis Bonaparte III, or something like that, the fake Bonaparte. As soon as he was exiled and basically kicked out of France after the failures of the Prussian War, the French returned to its cosmopolitan. Briefly, you can freeze cosmopolitanism briefly with the second religiousness, like what happened with the braggadocious, confident, cocky, warlike, LARPing a springtime Frenchman. But they always see the way unless it's strongly implemented. Like Peter the Great would be much more of a successful example. Literally, he was a weeb. He was a Western weeb. He was imposing his Western weebism through the city, right? It was a foreign culture, and some people can force it, some people can't. He brings up Alexander the Great. He wanted to fuse the Persian cultures with the Greeks, but the Greeks still had enough of independent peopleness to say no. A strong people can say no even to their heroes, which is it's always relational. It's even with kings or dictators or leaders. In a strong, healthy culture, it's always relational with Spengler. Because he says with the Magna Carta, with the Englishmen, he says that was a good revolution. Because even though it was anti-king, the Magna Carta was based on a people's right. And it was dynastic, right? Because it was all these lords of the land. It was dynastic. In contrast with the French Revolution, it wasn't dynastic. There was no sense of blood. It was completely ethereal. It was all theory, basically, no blood. All head and no rhythm, basically. All taboo and no totem. Right, because the totem springs spontaneously from the Magna Carta is a totem. The French Revolution is a taboo, for all intents and purposes. In Spengler's mimetic, in his language, basically, in his slang. And when you see something of Peter the Great, what you see with him is that he does impose his will upon the Russian people. But he says this when the Germans took over Rome, or when Catholicism took over Europe. He says the inner workings or the inner beliefs, you can never truly eradicate a culture. You can become above it, but the internal workings, eventually you can plant your tree above theirs, but there's always going to be roots that will intertwine. He says the way Catholicism is practiced in the South is very different from the Catholicism in the North, or to get colonial. The Catholicism with, the Lady Death in Mexico and all these weird variations of Catholicism in South America is very different than it is practiced in the Vatican. Right? He says no matter, you can conquer people, you can mutate a people, but there will always be these residual practices and spasms, to get more biological, spasms of innate instincts within the peoples themselves. You can never truly eradicate a people. You can only mutate them and subdue them and let you submerge them deeper into, let's say, the landscape. Yeah, you bury them, but you're just burying the roots deeper rather than letting it be the surface of the sun. I think that's what he would say, something along those lines in terms of mutated cultures. And he uses this as a way, just real quick, he uses this as a way to debunk shared racialism. He's like, as you see the success of Anglo-German unity, he gets sarcastic, he says, clearly.
Yeah.
As we saw the recent strengths of Anglo-German unity of race. Another dab on the zoological views of race. And so he sees this much more as an important aspect, is that the Athenian citizen is just as a symbol of Athenianism as the Doric columns. All these expressions of culture. Intent of not only the great man of destiny, but the intent of the culture itself is infused within this expression of cultural identities.
Yeah, what you're saying is it's where that distinction between race and nation is so important in these chapters. Because it's a sensitivity to one's destiny. And the destiny, he really seems to grow out of landscape. And it's why, so there's that inside of his that you were referring to earlier, where a sensitivity to destiny and therefore to one's culture and that world soul is not evenly distributed. It can, in certain times, like in the Gothic times, it was basically restricted to the nobility, and from there it diffused out into the people around them from their intense sensitivity to race and their blood. And then with things like you were talking about how with leaders in late civilization, say during Caesarist times, or with the second religiosity, those both arise when sort of people's sense of race and therefore their connection to the culture that previously animated their cities is gone. And all that's left is an intellectualism, and you can still have a sense of a people or a nation, because he basically says a nation it's a group of people who feel they belong to a nation, more or less. And you can still feel that, for example, with Caesarism, even though it's not animated inwardly by any sort of destiny. And it's why you can animate those things with these very, very abstract ideals like human rights or what, his zoological, what he calls the zoological idea of race. And then, yeah, like you were saying, he was saying, having just gone through the First World War, you can see how effective this shared white ancestry of Germans and Anglo-Saxons has gone. Yeah, it's all down to his very, very specific definition of race is the key to understanding most of these chapters, I think.
Yeah, and they're all intertwined. They're all interlaced. There's a beautiful remixing. Like, if we just read these 3 chapters, and you could go randomly, page 400 or whatever, you can, even without the context of that particular chapter, you can somehow plug it in to the first 3 chapters we read, or chapters of chapter book 1. You can literally pick Spengler at random and connect it to the Spengler verse or the Spengler mimetics. Yeah, he literally has his own little memeplex of concepts and ideas, not only words, but like you said, the shapes. We're constantly using shapes. Oddly, Spengler has a very tactile feel to him. You feel his concepts rather than necessarily think about them.
Yeah, and he's the sort of writer where you can be working to understand him if you're completely unfamiliar with him, and then there's always this moment where it just clicks, and then suddenly it's just not that difficult to read him anymore, because you suddenly get how he's approaching things, and and then Spengler logic makes sense.
He's a graphic novelist of the mind in many ways, I'd say.
He really is, yeah. I feel like you need to get past the filter of the numbers chapters in the first volume of Decline of the West, and then Spengler becomes fun. Yeah. Then him talking about like the racial and national makeup of ancient Persia becomes really fun.
He gets angry about the Persians too. He gets frustrated. Like, this is clearly a big debate at the point.
He gets frustrated about people using the wasn't it the spread of languages and the names of things as a way to work out where different nations were and, who influenced what and who influenced whom. And he says that's stupid because if people have any sort of inner unity, they will be of the land where they are racially, no matter where they move, so long as they have some sensitivity to destiny and they're not just the purest civilization man for whom space is, I guess, just completely interchangeable. It's I guess it's space were space to become physicist space, where your particular location and your particular time are just completely interchangeable units and unimportant. So for everyone besides that particular type of very late civilization Reddit person, the landscape will always be determinative of your race.
Yeah, landscape and historic events, or because he says peoples are formed I think he says relationships or relational. Because
that's right.
Because another way to counter the Reddit name, the name historians, he hates these people so much. He's like,
he's railing against them continuously.
He says, listen, are Americans a continuation of Italian people because America is named after an Italian cartographer? He's like, no, that's absurd. The American nation was formed in 1775 during the American Revolution, and he says during the Civil War, right? With conflicts, conflicts are historic, right? So it's landscape plus history, which is happens during great cosmic events, or sorry, not cosmic in the plant way. I mean cosmic in the non-Spenglerian way. Like for example, giant wars, catastrophes, things that shape nations. So it's both landscape.
Those also do occur in the cosmic sense for Spengler, because there will be outcomes of the destiny of a race or races.
Oh yeah, well the outcomes, because each intrinsic, because he talks about inner destinies to fulfilling to their personal ends, and the thing is, the people's destinies can be interrupted; they can be prematurely ended. Because he talks about this in Mesoamericans in the Mayans.
Shout out to Cortez.
Yeah, Cortez, which
friend of the show.
Friend of the show, the conquistadors. You know, they're getting their Mayan au pairs. We respect the hustle. We respect the hustle, but in many ways, Spengler will denounce and call the conquistadors savages, and have a sincere sense of mourning for the Mayans. He says they're a beautiful culture. They're one of the big 8 cultures and civilizations of the Mesoamericans. But he says, he shrugs his shoulders eventually. He's like, that's life. Sometimes when a culture or civilization, like he's used a plant metaphor, sometimes plants, right when they're about to go from their bulb form to bloom, they get chopped off. And he said, he shrugs his shoulders, that's life. In this 3 chapters, he says, how many potential nations, the Fili, he uses 2 Roman or Latin races. The Latins survived. The Latins got to grow and become Romans. How many non-Latins managed to grow and become? Like he says, the world, yes, there's 8 big capital C civilizations, but nations and cultures and peoples, the whole of existence is just a graveyard of basically of wasted embryos of potential peoples, just completely cut out and destroyed. And he doesn't. He mourns them the potential of all these new, because he does play alternate history in a lot in these 3 chapters. He's like, well, he likes to play alternate history. He likes to say, what if Germany played this way? What if the French, what if the Burgundies, and all these things? He plays alternate history. He respects the losers in many ways of civilizations. There's an oddly profound respect of that. He is a chauvinist, but he also respects the losers in many conflicts. In very weird ways, and it's a very touching thing, and you can see this in relationship, especially with the linguist, because he says Americans, they have no choice but to be linguistic nationalists, right? Speaking English, for example, that's really at that time was the only unifying front. And to give of the colonial example, is America, Quebec, and let's say South Africa, because Spengler was very popular in South Africa. The Boers were actually very big Spengler fans. Because they celebrate the fact. He's like, yes, Africa did change us. We are Boers. We're not Dutchmen anymore. We're our own Afrikaan, or the Afrikaans are a separate people now. And of course, Spengler being anti-Anglo certainly did help with his popularity there during the particular Boer War. And of course, with the Quebecois, when a Quebecois person goes to Paris and the waiter thinks their French is shitty, they start speaking to them in English. They're deeply offended. Like, how dare you? French is my first language, right? But it's Quebecois French, not Parisian French or Brittany French. So that distinct lack of longing and willing to want part of the people again. You are different. The Quebecois is a different race. The landscape of Quebec changed them. The landscape of America changed the settlers, and multiple different colonies and different people have a weird struggle with that identity. Well, with the Afrikaners, like, yeah, fuck the Dutchmen. We are definitely our own OC, do not steal, Tumblr fan fiction race. We are our own thing, our own people. Spengler's awesome, right? So this idea of landscape shaping you, and in Waking Fright, when you move to Australia, at some point you're going to fuck up a kangaroo. At some point, this is the natural calling of the landscape.
Destiny demands it.
Yes, destiny does demand. And I'd say the way he says landscape forms cultures, that is true. But of course, the way he, I don't know about you. I know you're a stem cell, so I had to ask his opinion of you. I'm pretty sure I won't get a Giga Chad jawline by moving to to Norway. I'm not going to get a Norwegian skull structure, sadly, or nor my children.
You're not going to be intimidatingly tall. By moving to Norway. It's min-maxing. What he's describing is like video game min-maxing, where you start off with a map, you get racial bonuses. Actually, his racial system. Yeah. If you move to Scandinavia, what do the Nords get? It's like some resistance bonus to magic.
Yeah, way his racial system may not work in real life, but it works in Elder Scrolls because that's exactly what happens to the elves. They immigrate from the Somerset Isles. The Dark Elves go to Morrowind, and the ash of the volcanoes literally darken their skin, right?
They degenerate. Evelyn was speaking about this. He was actually just describing the evolution of the Elvish race in the Elder Scrolls video game series.
Yes, and the Nords are magians.
This is why Vardenfell exploded.
Yes,
because of Titanic black magic and miscegenation.
Yes,
that's what Morrowind's about.
Vivek is literally mixed race. He has two colors, right? He's a hermaphrodite.
What has Lord Todd been reading that he's not telling us about?
This entire time, Todd has been a Straussian student of Spengler. Slowly,
he's been trying to send us messages.
Yes, because the Imperial Man in Skyrim, when the Imperial Man is degenerate, it's a late civilizational, classical civilization.
Mm-hmm.
The Imperial City is the focal
apart.
point. Yes.
Cyrodiil just can't hold the Empire together.
Right, and the Nords are Magians, right? Their nationality is based on the belief of Talos, the divinity of Talos. Right? So you got a late civilization, classical civilization, Imperials, right? And the Megapolis, right? He says the Megapolis is round and circular. The Imperial City is literally a circle with sectors, like a checkerboard. This entire time, Todd has been trying to teach us the gift of Spenglerian philosophy through Bethesda RPGs.
Given I'm sure the overlap between people who have read The Decline of the West and people who love Bethesda RPGs, at least your earlier ones, is probably 100%. I'm sure someone has tried to do a Spenglerian reading of the Elder Scrolls.
It fits so perfectly. It fits the Khajiit literally transform based on the phases of the moon. Listen, the overlap is greater than the people who've had sex and are big fans of Spengler. I think the overlap is strong.
Yeah. I'd say it's a safe bet to say that.
Well, because men degenerate. He does say men and women degenerate at different cycles. He doesn't get into details about it, but the way it has to work is that women only degenerate when the city is developed to such a degree that the cosmopolitan megapolis, the city as world, has commenced. So an only way for women to be quote-unquote emancipated or degenerate away from womanhood is a way if men degenerate from the nature and the landscape first. So so men have to degenerate first before women can degenerate, which is also an interesting concept that he doesn't play with. He doesn't really play with, but there's actually, just by his own interior logic, it has to be that way.
And then transhumanism then seems like not an extremely Faustian, like late civilization Faustian phenomenon. Peter Thiel is the spiritual leader of late Faustian man. It's a winter Faustian man becoming a transhumanist automaton on Mars, just purely blowing past our biology into the cosmos.
Right. Well, yeah. See, that's an interesting thing. I was debating how to connect it to the network states. Is kind of weird. What would Spengler think about? Like, how would the network state model work? Is it just a Renaissance too? This petty city politics, or is it a genuine kind of trying to recreate the Hellenistic classical? Is it a return to the classical city-state model, or is it a degeneration of the classical city-state model in terms of Renaissance style?
I see it as just so Faustian because it's trying to eliminate distance and further mathematize everything just to a degree that you can't do with physical states. With, you know, if you are within this physical boundary, you are in Australia. Something like a network state eliminates even that distance and even the slowness of communication across physical distance if your network state is just updating at the speed of light.
Well, actually, I have a test case for you. Is Singapore a classical polis, or is it Faustian? Because remember, he says the Chinese culture, he says somewhere in a footnote, he says, I believe, because it was the Yellow Rivers, that ancient Chinese culture is much more Western than it is either classical or Arabian. He says there's a deep cultural similarities between Chinese culture and Western culture.
I think, at least with East Asia, if I put on my Spengler glasses, I reckon East Asia looks like a pseudomorphosis in that you've got where Faustian culture is in its civilizational stage and is just spreading out as far as it can. And given that it's no longer animated by the landscape of Northern Europe and no longer needs it, it's outgrown that, it can be taken up by people who are not of that landscape. And it's basically just you've got this late Civ form being adopted by people in East Asia, and it's inspired them to live in extremely high-density cities to stop having children. Like South Koreans have, I forget what the birth rate is there, but it's just catastrophically low. Probably similar, like very, very low in China as well. I'm not sure what it is in Singapore. An intense focus on techniques and science and engineering. A real resentment of tradition. I mean, China post-Cultural Revolution. And has also taken up Marxism, at least notionally, which strikes me as an extremely sort of Faustian civilizational philosophy. It's one of pure mechanism, of pure causality, which really denies any sort of inner agency like race or a world soul in favor of economics, of technics as the determining force of history. Yeah. I mean, those are my initial thoughts. I think what's happening in East Asia is we're seeing them adopt late civilizational Faustian forms.
So you're saying even the mirror. So you're saying this city-states that, based on the fact that are intrinsically tied to technique, like the whole tech bro, what Balaji's trying to do, what, let's say, Bukele is trying to do, the very fact they're trying to use Bitcoin or cryptography or all these technological ways, it intrinsically taints them as late Faustian civilizations. They're not starting a new civilization through network states.
Yeah, I don't think it's a new civilization. I think it's the end of Faustian civilization. I mean, even something like a network state, I'm still just not totally sure. It's just doing such different things to a traditional state. I still think if you can't motivate people to die for your particular state, then it doesn't really count.
That's he basically also says that too. Like,
yeah.
When he says people their personal, he's talking about is basically Dunbar's number in many ways. Of course, he would not hate such a scientific concept, right? But
no. It's a spiritualized Dunbar number.
Yeah, that's basically what he's saying. These minorities, cultures and nations are represented by their minority, by their real nobles, true nobles. Nobles actually inherit and shape the culture around them. Like it's a spiritual Dunbar's number, as you said. And Spengler, I lost my train of thought. What is he? Oh yeah, with the network. Yeah, so with the idea of wanting to die for your nation, he says, the average Joe Blow, even at any time, the average felon, the average villager, the extension of their caring and their feeling goes to their family, their neighbors, maybe their town. Right, but when you have a awakening, a cultural national awakening, they will literally throw themselves body upon their own bodies or the bodies of the enemy. Right, you can awaken that potentiality of being. They suddenly plug in, they connect, they intertwine with the world tree of the nation. Basically, the great dynastic, their blood intertwines with the dynastic tree of the Faustian culture at that very time, in that moment of national, people, racial awakening. Again, not the skull-shaped awakening, the spiritual racial awakening.
He does throw in some asides about skull shapes, though. I really like the phrenological interjections he makes at a few points in these chapters.
Listen, he's a sensible centrist. He's not woke. He still believes skull structures are deeply important to who you are as a human being.
Yeah, he was an enlightened centrist of 1922 Germany, where... he's saying he doesn't like zoological race, but he will acknowledge that skull shape is important.
You gotta make sure your grandkids are born at the right spot. You gotta make sure you spawn. You gotta camp at the right spawn point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need to get lucky with your spawn location.
I mean, the rent prices in just Norway just go so high. Who's taller on average, Dutchmen or Norwegians?
I'm pretty sure the Dutch are the tallest people in the world. Tallest people in the world, 2025. Yeah, the Netherlands.
See, you got spawn camp in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
You got to brush aside the fellahin. That's not what because all they're not breeding anymore. So you have to flood the Dutchman with our genes. That's the cheap way of doing the pronatalist. And, eugenics, we don't need to waste the money. We just need to make sure our kids are born next to the beautiful
born
flower.
in the right place. Yeah. This is how you save your line as a short king. Just go to the Netherlands.
Listen, your son will have a better time of it. You just got somehow. You can actually blame your parents. How dare you breed me? And why
not give birth to me in the Netherlands?
Why did you conceive me in Guatemala? Damn it! Yeah, it has to be based on conception. I still don't know how he justifies landscapes. Like,
what stage of gestation do you need to be in? Like, do you need to be conceived? Is it where you are conceived that's important? Is it past a certain week of gestation that you need to be in a location? Is it birth? There are a lot of. I mean, I guess these are all mechanistic questions.
That's true.
Spengler would call me a spurg and a stem lord, and I'm just there's just a category error. I'm pursuing this in completely the wrong way.
Yeah, you're an English plant. You're an Anglo-psyop. You're trying.
I am fundamentally Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, I can't step out of that frame of mind.
He's not falling for your English trickery.
Yeah,
he's making a bundle. Us merely asking the question proves how unwise we are.
Yeah. If you ask that question, you've just completely disqualified yourself from any meaningful discussion of Spengler.
Actually, doesn't that make Spengler's work, the entirety of Spengler's work, just one big Kafka trap?
Yes. Yeah, it kind of does. An extremely fun one.
It's not a Kafka trap, it's a Kafka escape room. You like getting locked up in there, actually. It's fun.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked the first volume, but volume 2 is even more fun because he's just so much more confident.
Oh, it's like when a season of the show, when you're like season 4 of a great show, and you got the character dynamics, you already know the interior kind of logic and the rhythm, and this is a bottle episode. You just get to sit down, relax, and enjoy the show, basically. Well, we've learned to be a Spengler.
Yeah. If you've made it through volume 1, you can. Yeah, you won't have any problems with volume 2. It's just victory laps the entire time. It's just having fun.
Yeah, he's playing. Actually, another question as one Spengler scholar to another, and this is actually a sincere question. Where would Spengler's honest opinion, honestly, what would Spengler's opinion be on anime? Because Spengler actually had a very good talk on this, actually.
I truly don't know because I know nothing about anime. Like I know so little about anime that I just can't say.
Well, the memeplex. You're familiar with the memeplex of anime?
I mean, I'm familiar with people who have like anime PFPs.
Oh, you don't say.
Yeah. I really don't know. I mean, and probably also for whom, like for people in the West, is it just a late civilizational obsession with something that feels exotic and foreign?
That is well, because he talked about, for example, like he says, the Germans gave the knights, the idea of knights and chivalry was from a Germanic thing that spread through across. So he's not necessarily against cross-cultural, because he says, I could see elements of the Chinese in Swedish furniture. He's perfectly fine with that. He says that's natural, that's normal, that's not intrinsically bad. Like I'm in two minds of it. I could see it being a late civilizational thing, right? But it's almost like a pressure release valve of Japan, I'd say, because it's like romantic poetry. Like, because he says with German culture, German poetry, it's only after we formalized. He says this somewhere, instead of relying on Shakespeare or relying on French, because he says German poetry took a long time to find its footing. Of course, until Werther, the genius of Goethe, right? He says it took a long time for us until the Romantic period. Until the chivalric romantic period of poetry. That's where we found our roots, our stance in poetics, calling back to the age of chivalry, calling back to those times. We were on a connection path, but we got diverted and we got reconnected into that line after the damn Renaissance and its consequences have finally been dealt with. He says, right, during the... Yeah, he's pro-nationalism. He's the romantic nationalist in that one sense of continuing the destiny of world evolution. It's just the French libtard shit that he hates that came with it. Right? But he has... Again, he, of course, in terms of their historical standards, he hates romantic nationalism. Like, before he even got into that, he goes at length on their sloppy historical standards. Before talking about how X-rays, if you X-ray two dudes, you magically there's no differences between them, right? Like I said, very Elder Scrolls view on racial formations and phenotypes.
If you spend long enough in the Black Marshes, you can breathe underwater. Is exactly what Spengler was saying. And
immunity to poisons. Yes, you eventually grow a tail. That's the what the lesson.
Yeah, you turn into a scaly.
Yeah, a lusty Argonian. That's what the lusty Argonian maid is.
I'm surprised Tooky's Mag hasn't done an episode yet on the lusty Argonian maid.
I guarantee you, after Kane's Corner, I will bully Dave. We will do it from Kane's Corner. We'll go to Todd's Theater.
God bless Lord Todd. He's Lord Todd. Actually, I feel like is he is a microcosm of culture man degenerating into civilization man. Because in the beginning, and for people who want more Lord Todd lore, I highly recommend the Slop Kings series from Tooky's Bag. I'm not joking, I really like it. But I feel like the early Elder Scrolls games were very much cultural, capital C cultural products in the Spenglerian sense, in that they were rough, they were primitive in some ways, but they were also very vital. And then you reach the zenith of culture with the springtime and the summer with Morrowind. And I'm pretty sure Lord Todd was Lord Todd around for Morrowind?
He was actually the director of Morrowind.
Oh shit, yeah.
He was.
That's why I wasn't sure, because it doesn't feel Lord Todd. I mean, I guess, okay, compared to Daggerfall or something, it feels Lord Todd because it's not awful to play.
Daggerfall is the Latins to the early Roman Republic. That was Morrowind.
Yeah, I'm too late, Civ, to enjoy Daggerfall. Yeah, but you get something like Morrowind, but then it loses its roots, it loses its sense of destiny. And I liked Oblivion, but it has more of that, as broad as an ocean, as deep as a puddle, Lord Todd feeling. And then it just continues in that trajectory. I feel like Lord Todd's video game publication career is basically the trajectory of a culture into a civilization. Elder Scrolls 6 is probably... I'm bracing myself for it to be Fellaheen slop.
It is... Yeah,
I really hope it's not. I'm not letting myself get excited about it.
Well, but the thing is, Todd is self-aware. He's become neoclassical. Right, that's what I saw the Oblivion remake. Yeah. He knows he's aging. He knows, and actually, you could probably apply Spengler's idea of physiognomy and landscape to UI design or level design. You could probably actually apply not one for one, but the physicality of level design and actually gameplay design. You could maybe actually make an equivalent, because Daggerfall, the way you interact with Daggerfall is not the way you interact, not even lore or gameplay, nothing. The way you actually physically use the controls of the game, from Daggerfall to Morrowind to Oblivion, completely different. Even from the UI alone, from the way you deal damage alone, two different things that will shape your entire experience of the product itself. And
yeah, they are very different. So is Elder Scrolls 6 going to be an example of, say, the second religiousness, where a senile Lord Todd tries to return to the forms that as a child made him feel so safe and vital? He's going to return to including deeper RPG mechanics and to everything being procedurally generated. So we're going to get a world that is, a 1-to-1 size of, I don't know, the United Kingdom. It's going to take days to cross on foot, and it's just going to be copy-paste repeated with really, really deep mechanics that you don't really care about, and it'll feel hollow. Because, again, it is just the the senile restatement of a formerly destiny-oriented cosmos.
Right, and also the Megapolis, because if you...
These are my gaming predictions for the future in 2065 when the Elder Scrolls 6 is finally released.
You'll probably be Spengler's age by the time.
I'll be pretty old in 2065, yeah.
You'll be bald. Your physiognomy. You'll literally turn into Spengler. You're already there. You're in Czech. That's Germanic.
I'm already there. Yeah, yes. I'll have been fully Norwooded by 2065. The dihydrotestosterone reaper will have killed me.
The decline will be visible in your face.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
that will be perfect then. It will be a wintertime game for a wintertime man.
Yeah, it would be fitting. It would be a product of decline. And if you notice, with the level design of Oblivion, it's a Megapolis, right? Because the surrounding environment, because the end game is an Imperial City. All the outwards, much like the vampire cities of what Spengler talks about with the Megapolis, the Imperial City exists just so you can go outside, fight dungeons, collect loot, and sell it in the Imperial City.
No, the Imperial City exists so that you can just go and steal everything that's not nailed down in one night, break the game's economy because you're so wealthy, and then just kind of ignore it after that, unless you just want to sell stuff. See,
that's your Anglo brain talking, right? These objects are...
I'm too much of a systematizer.
Yes! These objects are supposed to have spirits. They're supposed to have a spiritual religious meaning, like they did in Morrowind, right? The little shrines, the little candles, and the little runes they had of Vivek and the three gods. And if you notice with Vivek, yes, the Vivek city is there. And the way the cantons, right? They float. Their religion is based on proximity. It's not Magian. It's much more because they're much more like the Hellenic man. It's an eternal present. You're always floating. That asteroid is frozen in time above the city. They're Hellenic in many ways. Their gods have physical bodies. Vivek. The Nords or mankind are Magians. The Aedra are ethereal, opposed to the Daedra, who has a physical embodied spirits, and literally physical bodies.
This part of the episode is written for true fans only.
And the fact, I guarantee you, this makes complete sense in your head because you're the only other Spengler Bethesda fan.
This makes complete sense to anyone who has read the first volume of The Decline of the West in full, and maybe part of the second, because again, the overlap between those people and those people who know a lot of Elder Scrolls lore is probably perfect.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry to say, Todd's second religiousness already came. That was Starfield, my man. It's just nothing but downhill from here.
Yeah,
that was his best. That was his feeble attempt. Exactly. Exactly. That was his attempt at second religiousness.
This comes from someone who actually sort of enjoyed Fallout 4.
It's fun. It's fun for what it is.
Fallout 4, if you just mod the shit out of it, like I think it's the War of the Commonwealth mod makes Fallout 4 so good. It'll annihilate your CPU. It'll turn your computer into a volcano. But it's really good. Yeah, I enjoy slop. Fallout 4 slop was good, so long as you can mod Preston Garvey out of the game, so he doesn't call you every 30 seconds about a settlement. That's okay, but yeah, I couldn't do Starfield. That was, I've not reached that level of inward devastation yet, the ravages of Faustian civilization, to be able to enjoy Starfield.
Wait, you know what it was? You know what? Fallout 4 is the Byzantium Empire of Bethesda, right? Because it was influence, but instead of Arabians or the Magian, it was Nordic, right? Because he got the idea from Minecraft, and I think Notch is like Norwegian or something like this, right? So in many ways, Fallout 4 is a second religiousness because you're playing as a springtime. The best way to play Fallout 4 is either with sim settlements. The settlements, building civilization.
Sim settlements is very good. Yeah. My first playthrough was without it, and I hated the settlement system. And my second playthrough was with it, and I really liked it. Yeah.
Yes, when you lean into the blood and rhythm of the waste, you're a fella. You are a soul fella having to restart.
No, unmodded, it's Fellaheen for... With Sim Settlement, though, you are playing springtime cultural Fallout.
Yeah, you actually go through the process. You go from Fellaheen to the village. From the village, you slowly develop to capitalism, right? You actually go through the slow process of through.
Sims, yeah, there you have it. Sim Settlements for Fallout 4 actually lets you live the life cycle of a culture.
And when you spend 2 hours...
Including the boredom and ennui that sets in when you're 60 hours deep in your playthrough, and then you suddenly have the realization that you have been through this same dungeon many times before. You've lockpicked this particular loot box many times before. You've shot a super mutant in vats many times before, and you turn off the game. And you're like, well, I'm inwardly spent. I have no more destiny. I'm uninstalling this.
Yeah, you've already gooned to the same Piper titty mod 100 times before. You're really out of real.
The jiggle physics mods to you.
No, yeah, but it actually it's really fitting. You do feel like you are done. You are just tired, right? You don't give a fuck about your son at this point. Your son is still somewhere in the institute. You don't care. You literally don't care about your own continuation of blood being. You're just tired of making this damn pipe pistol for the 400th time in a row.
Yeah.
You've experienced the ennui. Actually, you're actually right.
Yeah, actually right. Yeah, this is not only is this the correct way to interpret Fallout 4. It's the canonically correct way. This was Bethesda's design document.
Yeah, it
was just a picture of Spengler's face.
It was a Straussian design document this entire time. It was only the true students of Todd can actually interpret Fallout 4, Feline 4.
Yeah, is this the long march through the institutions? It's Lord Todd, in producing Feline 4, was planting the seeds of a Spenglerian view of history into everyone who played it.
Honestly, I can see it. I can generally see it at this point. Even when people, their language might say otherwise, but what they're trying to insinuate, when you hear people complaining about the writing, Todd wants you to complain about the writing. Exoterically, it's garbage. He wants you to experience it so you can realize the esoteric meaning behind it. He's been playing. We should have trusted the plan this entire time.
I'm sorry, Lord Todd, that I ever doubted you. I will play Starfield. I will buy the 30 legendary editions of Starfield that are going to be released at 6-month intervals for the rest of my natural life. And then for the remainder of my unnatural life as a cyborg on Mars with a Neuralink chip in my brain, watched by Palantir all the time, as I am a disembodied Faustian spirit, I will continue to buy not only Fallout 4, I will continue to buy Starfield. I'll buy Starfield 2 in 2500 AD when it's finally released. I'm sorry, Lord Todd.
Actually,
please have mercy on me.
Listen, no, when you hit full end tower state, much like your book, The Tower, the end state is just Skyrim forever. And when it's connected to your optic nerves. Like, as soon as you wake up, it's just a cart sequence. Every morning you wake up, it's just a cart sequence from the Legendary Edition.
Yeah, and every now and then it glitches out because it is still on the Game Brio engine.
When the game crashes, you just have a Caesar?
Yeah. Yeah, every now and then the dragon at the beginning is Thomas the Tank Engine.
Yeah, no, you have to pay for it though. The paid mods. It'll just be
paid. Yeah, paid mods will be implemented, and I will love them. I will fully embrace paid mods at that stage.
It'll be a post-capitalistic system because capital will be finally emancipated from mankind, but you still have to pay for paid mods somehow.
yeah, that will be the one object of barter.
The last two human beings alive will be Nick Land and Todd Howard.
Yeah. Todd Howard and Nick Land just talking about Spengler until the heat death of the universe.
the Bitcoin and Skyrim will be the last things to exist in this crusty hell of Earth.
Yeah. Paying for Skyrim mods with Bitcoin on Jupiter is the future of Faustian man.
Oh no, capitalism will literally, intelligence will just be playing Skyrim forever. That's a true D-cell way to stop capital. That's how you stop capital. Actually, that's what you just make. It's instead of the infinite paperclip, it's the infinite making the AI make another stealth archer build for the uptime time. Yeah. They
will never nerf the stealth archer build. That's the one aspect of race and being that is remembered by Lord Todd. is the stealth archer build. That's eternal.
Oh, that is the version of the landscape, right? As soon as the only way, optimal way to play Skyrim, the optimal way to play Morrowind is a mage, right? That's the landscape morphing your character to have certain magical stats. To play Skyrim, you have to, the landscape shapes you to be a stealth archer build, no matter your choice, no matter what your specs. Another way of overlapping Spengler in game design.
I feel like Spengler's a lot more influential in game design than I ever gave him credit for.
It works too. Like, we're shitposting, but it actually generally fits. It's coherent.
That's why I really like systems like Spengler's, like Bataille's, like Evelyr's, because they're quite internally consistent, and they're also capacious enough that you can slot basically anything into them and make it work. I'm sure if we could do like a 1,000 plateaus reading of Bethesda's oeuvre. It could be that could be the final plateau, just talking about Skyrim and Fallout 3 and onwards.
Yeah, Fallout 76 is a solar anus.
Yeah, Fallout 76 is just pure sacrifice. It does not exist to be utilized. It exists to be discarded.
Oh, actually, I have a. You're an accursed share, dude. So, in order to prevent capital from destroying us, we have to make sure it keeps on playing Skyrim. But in order to do so, we have to continually making mods, right? Making mods to make it fresh each and every single time. Is that an example of a accursed share to prevent the apocalypse? Right, you're expending energy.
Just have a potlatch of mods.
Yeah,
it's you have to create increasingly higher definition lewd models of various characters in the game and exchange them for even higher resolution lewd skins. Like, you'll be going to 8K skins, 16K to 32K, just exponentially higher resolutions of lewd skins and models to be exchanged.
Your mom walks in. She's like, "Mom, I was just trying to prevent World War III."
Yeah, this is actually exactly what the second volume of the Accursed Share is about. He's talking about eroticism. It's just about the not the exchange of women in incest prohibition laws. It's actually about the exchange of Fallout 4 lewd mods.
It fits. It fits.
This is canonically the right way to read Bataille. Anyway, should we leave it there?
I think listen, we're ending on a proper solar anus. It's the proper end of this body of work.
Yeah. I feel like this conversation could stop now, and it could go on for another 3 hours of us further pulling apart the Elder Scrolls.
We literally turn this into our version of Kane's Corner. It's just Todd's theater. It's the entire time. It was just a secret plan from both of us. Promo code at the end of the episode. Book Club from Hell.
We've been talking to GOG.com. If you use the Book Club from Hell promo code, you can get, I don't even know if Skyrim's on GOG. Probably. You can get it for 50% off.
Oh no, you're giving Todd 5% off. You're giving Todd too much credit.
Oh yeah. Todd won't let you. Yeah, you get 1% off. You can get a horse armor mod for free.
And of course, don't forget to download the update that breaks all the mods you paid for, by the way.
Oh yeah. Well, you have to do that. There's no respect for the people who are holding your shitty game engine together, than just breaking all of their hard work repeatedly, so you can make a quick buck on Skyrim Legendary Edition 50.
Well, they desire to torture at this point. If you're a Starfield modder, you desire it.
Yeah, if you're a Bethesda modder at this stage, you know exactly what you're in for. They want it.
Actually, you know what? Based on your latest shout out to your recent short story you published, I actually generally think a Spengler Bethesda story would be a good way. It would be a good spiritual successor to your story about Mishima fanboys peeing themselves on the squat rack.
I really should. Yeah, that's the sort of thing I could bang out in an hour because it all already exists in my head. I've played enough Elder Scrolls and Fallout to be able to do that without referencing anything.
It would generally make it for a great short story.
All right, and for everyone listening, Thanks for listening this far. If you've made it 2 hours and 10 minutes in, or whatever it is,
you're
a true fan.
Only the most hellish hellions and the top tuggers have lasted this long.
Exactly. We'll see you next time for. I'm pretty sure it's the section on Arabian culture next.
Yeah, he has a big beef. I think it's literally the problems. Hold on. Yeah, the problems of the Arabian culture.
Yeah, that everyone else has got it wrong.
Oh yeah, that's another big beef he has. Is the definition of what is Arabian.
Yeah. We'll see you next time for that. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. See you next time. Good night and good tugging.